Hi everybody, how are you? It's Dr. Cruz from Design Your Destiny. So I was thinking about what I was going to talk to you all about today, and one of the most important things that we need to be aware of is the meaning that we give things that we receive through our senses. So our senses are our eyesight, what we see, what we smell, what we taste, what we hear, what we touch. These are our senses. And everything that gets inputted into our brain goes into our brain through our senses. So what we see in the world, we identify it. That information is received through the sensory organ within the brain, and it goes to the occipital lobe, right? So that we have vision. That's how we actually see something. We don't see things with our eyeballs. This is just the vehicle to receive the sensory information. And it goes to the occipital lobe of the brain and it gets interpreted. So first, I want you to understand that you have a brain and you have a mind. So your brain is the organ, the actual organ in your skull. And it is composed of tissue. And it weighs right around 3 pounds, give or take. And the organ itself is just like any other kind of organ, like the heart, like the lungs, like your kidneys. It's an organ. But your brain is not your mind. Your mind is something completely different. Your mind is the conditioning that occurs within the brain. So there's 3 major parts of the brain I want to talk about today. And the first part is your brainstem, which is in the back of your head. Your brainstem is a primitive part of your brain. It was the first part of your brain, or one of the first parts of your brain to develop. And it's connected to your spinal cord. So it connects from your spinal cord, then there's the brainstem, and then it connects to a different part of your brain, right? So that part of your brain, your brainstem, its primary job really is to communicate between the main part of your brain and the spinal cord. It transfers information. And the information, without getting too deep, primarily relates to your reflexes, to survivability in life, our instincts. It communicates with the rest of our body through the autonomic system, what keeps our heartbeat going, what controls our blinking, anything that happens automatically. Saliva production, our sleep-wake cycle, when we fall asleep and when we wake up, that kind of happens internally, you know what I mean? So you have that part of the brain. That's the brainstem. And then you have what used to be called, and some people still call it the limbic system. So the limbic system is in the middle part of your brain, give or take. It's in the middle part of your brain. And the limbic system it's predominantly associated with the fight or flight aspect of our emotions. It is considered an emotional, the emotion center of our brain. Within the limbic system is a part of the brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is what initiates or kind of turns on your fear factor. That's communicated through your amygdala. And next to the amygdala is your hippocampus. And your hippocampus is associated with memory. So if you have, and there's two amygdala, right? Just like there's two halves of your brain, right? If you ever see a brain, it's like an oval thing, but there's a left hemisphere and there's a right hemisphere, right? And so there are two amygdalas, right? Just like there's two parts of the brain, there's two amygdalas. And right next to the amygdalas is the hippocampus, or somewhere around the amygdala is the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is, like I said, associated with memory. So one of the reasons why we remember certain we remember, but sometimes it's subconscious. Sometimes we don't know that we remember something that terrified us, is because the hippocampus is so close to the amygdala. So when the fight or flight reaction initiates, because the hippocampus is so close, that memory gets embedded stronger than if it was not next to the amygdala. So that's really good information to know, at least to understand why certain things are maybe stuck in our memory that affect us so emotionally. Because when we're emotionally affected by something, whether it's something we fear, something that petrified us, something that scared us, something that almost took us out, war, PTSD, tragedy, abuse, any of those kinds of things. I'm thinking right now, like I don't like bridges, right? So maybe something happened in my youth that I don't consciously remember, but subconsciously my mind, which we'll talk about in a minute, the difference between the brain and the mind, maybe my mind subconsciously remembers something that happened on a bridge, or something that petrified me, that resembles a bridge. And so the reason that I subconsciously might remember this is because the hippocampus is next to the amygdala in my brain and the emotion center of my brain. So I don't know why I don't like bridges. I don't know why I get scared when I go over them. I have some ideas now that I'm older, but those are things that I've rationalized with my mind. But what initiated the fear, I have no idea. That happened subconsciously. So the three parts, the two that I already talked about, are the brainstem, what is called the limbic system. Some people still use it. Some people call it something different now. And then your prefrontal cortex, which is the front part of your brain. And the front part of your brain is the thinking brain. And this part of the brain doesn't fully develop until we're about the age of 25. And so if you've ever heard people say, teenagers they do dangerous things, they don't make good decisions, they are, just living in their own world, they're not thinking about consequences, they don't plan well, they are, not managing, maybe their time well, whatever kinds of things that people do under the age of 25, that is much different from the more mature and thinking and rational adult. The predominant reason is because this part of the brain hasn't fully developed yet, right? And it's called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is instrumental in planning, making good decisions, because when you use the prefrontal cortex of your mind, you are judging consequence. You're considering, what are the potential consequences? What do I have to lose in this situation? Sometimes when people are younger, they're not thinking about what they have to lose at all. They're doing very adventurous and risky activities, maybe drag racing, maybe jumping off of cliffs, maybe fighting, maybe staying up really, really late and not thinking about how it's going to affect them tomorrow. Maybe experimenting with drugs. They're not thinking rationally. They're not thinking maturely about the dangers that's associated with something like that. People under 25 are a lot more impulsive. They don't have as much control over their emotions because at that stage, this part of the brain that controls emotion through logic and rationality is not fully developed. So because this part is not fully developed, the limbic system that's in the middle part of your brain is the predominant active part of the brain. So the mind is something different. Okay, so there's a lot more to the brain, but I just wanted to identify those three parts to the brain because it's important to conceptualize. If you understand that you have a brain and your brain is the engine to your entire body, your brain is what makes everything happen in your body. Everything. Me moving my fingers, that comes from the back part of my brain. Different parts back there. Motor skills, right? That's controlled by the brain. My verbal ability, that's controlled by the brain. My visual ability is controlled by the brain. What I hear is processed in the brain. There's a segment of my brain that's for it interprets, but it also it just receives the sensory sound, and then it goes through the ears, and then it gets processed in the brain. Digestion, when you eat, when you digest your food, and it gets broken down into sugars and fats and energy and all of that, that's controlled by the brain. When you go to the bathroom, that's controlled by the brain. Fingernails, the fact that they can grow back, that's controlled by the brain. Your nervous system is controlled by the brain. The brain communicates through nerve endings to different parts of the brain and also sends out neurotransmitters that communicates with your muscular system, and you have different nervous systems. And so it all is connected from the brain, right? There's other parts in your body that assist, but if you've ever seen someone or heard of someone being brain dead, and that essentially they're on a machine to help them breathe, and they say, we need to disconnect the machine and let them pass through life. It's because their brain is no longer functioning. So when the brain is no longer functioning, the body, in essence, is dead. There are medical exceptions where, certain organs or something could still be working with the assistance of machines and things of that nature. But for all intensive purposes, if your brain doesn't work, you're pretty much out of commission, Anything and everything is controlled by your brain. Your emotions is controlled by your brain. How you think is controlled by your brain. So I really want to emphasize the importance of learning about your brain, okay? If I could do all of my education over, from my bachelor's to my master's to my PhD to my continuing education and other certifications that I have, I would trade it all in. I would trade every degree that I have in, and I would focus on neuroscience or neuropsychology, probably neuropsychology, because that incorporates the mind also. Neuroscience, there's a little distinguishment. There's such a variety of neuro categories. Like there's neuroscience, neurobiology, neurophysiology, neuropsychology, neuroscience. Did I say those? Neurology, that's a whole different one. So, if you decide to look into neurology as the umbrella, look at all the subsectors of concentrations under neurology because the brain is phenomenally fascinating. I promise you. It's so interesting. It really is. And it helps you to understand other people. Once you understand your own brain and you understand your mind and how it works, then you can start understanding other people and why other people do some of the things they do. And, if you see someone with ADHD, or you see someone with bipolar, or you see someone with anxiety, or you see someone that's anorexic, or you see someone who is depressed, or you see someone who's just hyper, whether ADHD or not, but they're just hyper, or they're more introverted. All the different aspects of other people. When you see them, then you really begin to understand them because you understand the brain and you understand the mind. And then if you understand the brain and the mind, then you understand personality because it all kind of snowballs and goes together. Okay? So the mind is different from the brain. So the mind you can't touch. The brain is a tangible organ. You can touch it. Tangible meaning like you can touch it. This pen is tangible. The brain is tangible. The mind is not tangible. So there are different understandings of what the mind is. But this is my understanding of the mind, right? I try to keep things really simple. I don't like details. I don't like getting confused. I don't like, the more details you go into, the more people can debate an issue. I'm not interested in debating. I'm interested in understanding on whatever level I need to understand so that I could advance in my knowledge and progress, right? I'm not interested in debating minutia or debating semantics or debating whatever. You know what I mean? It's just not my thing. So the way I think of the mind is the conditioning of how we think. The mind is the power. So this is my belief. My belief is I have been created by my creator, right? And everybody has a different name for their creator. So that's a detail I don't worry about, right? For me, it's God. Whatever God means to somebody else, I'm not really interested in. I don't care. So for me, God represents energy, a source, an all encompassing, empowering, omnipotent source of energy. To me, God is not a person. It's not a place. It's not a thing. It's just energy, right? And this energy is what created me, right? And we call it God. And I am connected to that energy because I have been created from that energy. This is my personal opinion. Just like my daughter was created from me. So she has my DNA, right? So that's a technical term for my power. Some of me is in her, right? And she learns from me through my word. I teach her, right? I teach her how to think, how to process her emotions, how to plan, how to achieve things, how to be successful. I teach her good habits. I teach her how to stay safe. I teach her, different things like that, right? Which is what parents are supposed to do. Parents are supposed to continue to educate themselves so they can continue to educate their children so that everybody advances in life. That's my opinion. And so I liken that to God, right? So God, I am a byproduct of God. He created me, or it created me, whatever. And so I am connected to its energy. And some people call the universe the universal mind. And the universal mind, in my opinion, is God. Because everything that is was created by this creator, right? Whatever you call the creator, I call it God. So how do I, oh gosh, I hate when my computer does that. How do I learn from my Creator? I learn from my Creator through the Word of God, just like my daughter learns from my Word, right? So she learns from my Word, and I learn from my Creator's Word. I'm her Creator in the flesh, and the universe, universal energy called God, is our Creator, right? All of our creators. Me and her. We'll talk about me and my daughter. So, do you understand the comparison there? So, and that's why, the Bible says, our Father who art in heaven, because he is I don't know if he has a gender. It's energy to me, right? I don't get caught up in those details. I don't know. I don't care. I don't care if it's a girl, guy. I don't care. Like, it's not important. But it is our Creator, and therefore I'm connected to that, and I have its power. And so when I think about the mind, I think about how my brain is conditioned to think. Now, I said the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that operates as a thinking brain, right? So without going into detail, just understand this is the part of the brain. When you start thinking logically, when you start planning, when you start thinking about consequences and things of that nature, the blood flow activates in this part of the brain. And subconsciously, we get programmed throughout our life how to think. From the moment we're born until today, you and I have been programmed how to think based on our environment. Okay? And it happens predominantly subconsciously. And we don't realize that we are being conditioned to have certain responses to certain sensory information that's incoming, whether it's what we see, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, right? So when I smell, oh gosh, what are they called? These like flowers. Oh my gosh, I forget. But there are these flowers when I was younger, like these flowers, and then you pull the stem out, and I think you can lick it. I think when I was younger, I used to lick it. But is it butter? I don't know. But anyway, when I smell those flowers, gosh, I wish I remember what they're called. It's like on the tip of my tongue. But when I smell them, I have a memory that's triggered from my childhood because I really remember loving these, I call them flowers. I don't know if they're technically flowers, but I remember loving these flowers. They were by my grandmother's house. And so I had an emotional connection to it. Remember how I said that in the limbic system, of your brain, you have the hippocampus, which is your memory. So in the emotion part of the brain is the hippocampus, which is the memory, which activates memory. So because I had an emotional reaction and connection to this flower, whatever the heck it's called, it's going to drive me nuts until I remember, I have this memory that's been conditioned in my mind subconsciously, and when I smell it, I get triggered to that memory. The same thing with cucumbers. I have an affinity for cucumbers because my grandmother, she was very, very poor. My grandmother was dirt poor. I mean, horrible. I have an article. She was evicted from her home. She lived in Oregon Hill, Richmond, Virginia, and it was just a very, very, very poor community for predominantly white people. And she lived there. She lived across the street from a cemetery. So most times when you live across the street from a cemetery, I don't think that you're in a wealthy neighborhood. I think you're probably in a more impoverished neighborhood. And so we were in a very impoverished neighborhood. But um, she lived on a little bit of money that she got, like life insurance or something. I don't know. A pension, I think, from my grandfather who passed away before I think I was 5. And it was only a few dollars because he was a coal miner. But she used the money, part of it, to plant cucumbers. And so I have an affinity for cucumbers now because I loved my grandmother very, very much. And she tried to keep me out of foster care. And because she was so poor and she was a little older, she was probably in her mid 50s to 60s. Either she knew she couldn't handle a 10-year-old, or I guess, I don't know, 8, 9, probably 9, 10, 11, I don't know, somewhere around there. Or the state just said, you're too poor and not capable of physically raising this child. So I was removed from her home. But the one fond memory that I have of my grandmother is that when I would go visit her, she would give me cucumbers. So because the emotional part of my brain is right next to the memory portion, that embedded itself in my subconscious mind. Okay? So your mind is trainable, and this is what I want you to understand. Regardless of how you think currently, you have the power to change how you think. You have the power to change how you think in an instant. If you're in a bad mood, you can say, I recognize this is my emotions and my hormones, and I don't want to feel this way. I want to feel something different. And I'm going to do something different so that I can feel something different. You have power over your mind. You control your brain. Don't let your brain control you. Okay? So, what does that mean? The mind and the brain are different, right? You have power over your mind, and you have, to some extent, power over your brain. Okay? Don't let it run you. You must decide that you are the conductor of your vehicle. Okay? This is your vehicle. Your body is your vehicle. And what shows up, your emotions, your thinking process, your, your interpretations of things, your responses, what you eat, how you feel physically, how you look physically, all of that is in your control. Your belief system is in your control. Your belief system is what conditions your mind. Your belief system has predominantly been influenced from everything from your birth up to now, because most people have not awakened to the fact that they can control how they think. And so what happens is that they live passively through life, receiving the conditioning from the external stimulus, whether it's other people, whether it's your environment, your community, your education, your teachers, your own inner thoughts, whatever it is you're watching on TV or YouTube or social media, all of that incoming information is conditioning your mind. So that's why it's important for you to not let certain songs, don't listen to certain songs. Certain songs talking about killing people, or TV programs talking about killing people and all this kind of thing, turn it off. You have the right to say, I don't want to watch that. I'm a big fan of saying, I have to be careful what I let my eyes see, because once I see it, I can't unsee it. I have seen it forever. And my brain might remember it. We have short-term memory, we have long-term memory, we have subconscious memories. I don't know what my brain is going to remember. So I got to be careful what I expose myself to. I'm taking control. over the information I allow into my brain. I don't listen to the news. I don't care if World War III is going on out there. I'm not listening to the news because that news is going to freak me out. And I got to focus on what I got to focus on, because what I've learned from history is it doesn't matter what's going on outside in the world. At the end of the day, what matters is, do I have a place to live? Am I achieving my goals? Do I have money? Do I have food in my refrigerator? Am I helping people? Am I living up to the potential that I'm supposed to live up to? Do I understand, how to conduct my life so that I can create it instead of it controlling me? I need to control it, because whatever is going on out there has always been going on out there, and it's going to continue to go on out there, and I have no influence over that. The only thing I have influence over is myself. Until I become wealthy enough to influence something external of me through finances. Change predominantly happens through finances. If you have enough money, you can run for office. You get into office, that's how you make change. If you have enough money, you can support other people that are going to do good for the government and for the community and for the world. If you have enough money, you can create water filtering systems so that other communities have clean water. Like Flint, Michigan, when they had their water crisis. I don't know what's going on with it now. Or third world countries. I cannot influence the quality of water they have because I'm not wealthy right now. Not to that extent. I'm wealthy in other areas. So that's important to understand too. Wealth doesn't just come through finances. Okay? You have mental wealth. You have physical wealth. If you're sick, it doesn't matter how much money you have. You're sick. You can't buy good health. That's why it's important to eat well. Okay? Take care of our bodies. So I digress a little bit. But what's important to understand is that sensory information in our environment comes in through our senses, okay, into the brain. Then you have things called neurons that do their job and they communicate. And different things happen in the brain. And then that communicates with nerve endings and all kinds of stuff goes on in the body. But this is how the brain takes information from out here and brings it into here, and then we get a reaction, whether it's fear, whether it's comforting and soothing, whether it's anger. There's a lot of anger. This is why people have anger management issues, because the information, that whatever's external gets received through hearing or seeing, right? Typically we get angry about something we see, or we get angry about something we hear. And that information goes into our brain through our eyes and through our ears. It goes to the appropriate part of our brain to get processed. And then there's the neurons communicate, and there's an interpretation that occurs. And that interpretation is predominantly based on a few things. It's based on our current level of knowledge. This is why it's very important to stay in personal growth and development books, so that you can continuously educate yourself. Right? There's a formal education and a self-education. Okay? And so and I would say maximize both of them smartly. And so that information gets inputted and interpreted based on our knowledge. And sorry, I'm reading a message. And it also gets interpreted based on how our brain is working. So if we have been drinking a lot of alcohol, if we've been doing a lot of drugs, if we have a learning disability, if our brain is not functioning at its at a healthy capacity, then that's going to affect how we interpret things, right? So there's a segment of psychology called emotional intelligence. And it's very important that we learn how to control our emotions. Because when we control our emotions to a stimulus, to an event that occurs, that we interpret and then it angers us or whatever the response is going to be, if we can control our emotions and activate our thinking brain, then we can give the event a better meaning, a healthier meaning. Instead of getting angry at it, we can pause, we can rationalize, we can say, wait a minute, there's a different way of looking at this. Or I don't have to respond. Just because this thing is trying to upset me, I don't have to respond. I don't have to scream at people. I don't have to engage in dysfunction. You know what I mean? So what I really want you to understand is that once that information, that stimulus goes into your brain and everything happens and you start interpreting it, this is where you have power. You have to learn how to interpret it properly, smartly, so that you can give it the right meaning. If you give something the wrong meaning, it can literally control you. Okay? We can get controlled by people. They can trigger us, and then our emotional system and our reflexes start reacting. There's two ways to think, or there's two ways to respond. You can react, which is not thinking at all. You're just reacting, right? It's an instinctual or an emotional reaction. Or you can respond properly. And you do that by not reacting, by staying in control, and by thinking things through, okay? And how do you think things through? Well, you got to have knowledge in your mind. You have to educate yourself so that you understand how to interpret things. Okay? So for instance, if, let's say one of my clients, right? I'm a therapist. So every client is not calm, cool, and collected. Sometimes I have some clients that are just stricken with anxiety. So they're very hyper and they got like all this energy, and it can be aggressive sometimes. It can be, out of control a little bit. But I can't allow myself to get triggered by their emotions. And even when they get offended by something I say, or they don't like it, because everybody's not going to like everything you say. So this can be true for you too. Even if you are right and you're telling somebody the right answer, they may come at you with full force, with resistance, because they don't want the right answer right now. That's a whole different part of psychology. But if you understand what's going on with that person, which is knowledge, you have the knowledge to understand where that person is in the moment, and you can have self-control, you interpret the experience you're having with that person smartly. As opposed to if you didn't have the knowledge of understanding where that person is, then you might actually react because you're being triggered by them. Okay? And you could be getting triggered subconsciously, which happens all the time. But we gotta be in the state where we can identify that we can identify in our body. We have to know ourselves well enough to know what it feels like when we're about to get triggered, or what it looks like. Like I'm not even going over there with those people because I know that's a bad situation for me. I'm going to get triggered. I could tell by their energy. I'm not going to, that's not something I want to get involved in. So I smartly use my knowledge and I make a better decision. I process the information properly. Okay? So we have to continuously educate ourselves and be proactive. That's why reading books is so important. I have a library probably over 400, 500 books. Did it again. 400 or 500 books. And I love books. I haven't read every single book. Sometimes I just pick up the book or I order the book. I get a lot of free books from the library because I like the title. I'm like, oh, this sounds interesting. I have probably 10 books on philosophy, and I've read maybe just a few pages because philosophy is not my predominant area of focus right now. But, when I have free time, maybe I go lay on the beach, whatever, I bring a random book that ordinarily I would not have time to read. My computer right now is on my books, but I have some books over there. I just picked up one the other day. It looked very interesting, and I know I probably may never read it. Maybe I'll read it when I'm 60, and if I got free time. I don't have free time right now. But it looked good, And then there are other books that I pick up, and I just read whatever chapter resonates with me. You don't have to read the whole book. Just pick whatever chapter resonates with you. The important thing is that you start reconditioning your mind. This is what you have power over, okay? You can recondition your mind to believe anything that you want to believe. You don't have to believe what your life has conditioned you to believe. For instance, in foster care, for decades, I didn't believe I had personal power. And this is why we need mentors. And maybe I'll do a video on that next time. But get you a mentor, because you got to have also other people in your life feeding you knowledge and showing you a different way to live, a better way to live, a smarter way to live, a healthier way to live. Okay? So that you can continuously be learning. Always learn. Always seek knowledge. If you always seek knowledge, you will awaken one day to your real self, to your true self, to your more enlightened self. Okay? So consider, what is the meaning you are giving things in your life today? What controls you? What have you surrendered to? What has defeated you? What are you conquering? What meaning do you give to relationships that you have with people? Are you a prisoner of a relationship? Are you a prisoner of a mentality? Are you a prisoner to drugs? Do drugs control you, or do you control yourself? Okay? These are really important things to know. What is the meaning you're giving these things in your life? That comes from the knowledge you put into your mind and how you condition your mind. Okay? All right. This was a way longer video than I anticipated making, but it's very important for you all to understand. Please take time to learn about your brain. Take time to learn about your mind. It should be the only thing you're focused on right now until you become an expert in it. Until you become an expert in your own mind, you should not be focusing on anything else. Okay? I mean, outside, if you got to go to school, you got to go to school, obviously. But don't come home and just sit on social media all day looking at the trash that's not even real. That doesn't contribute to your advancement at all. I want to encourage you. You do whatever you want. It's your life, right? But I want to encourage you to invest in your mind, because your mind is a part of how your brain works. And this controls all of this. All right? It's the best investment you'll ever make in your life. All right. I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.